And we're back. It is COMP125, that's client-side web development here at Centennial in the summer 2016 semester, and we are week 4, part 1 of our broadcast. What we're talking about today primarily is debugging techniques, right? Debugging techniques. If you look up on eCentennial, we have a little PowerPoint that we can refer to. I'm not going to go through every piece of it like normal. I'm going to kind of talk about it my way. But what I will be talking about today is some of the highlights of what we've been talking about already. Actually, you guys have had debugging from day 1, right? We haven't really, I don't do document.write, but we'll talk about how to use things like alerts today in this class as opposed to using console.logs, and also thinking about things like, if we get to it today, or next day, we'll talk about breakpoints, how to use breakpoints in the browser to kind of skip through your results. Also, if I have time this week, what I'd like to try and do is, if you're using Visual Studio Code, there are some interesting debugging features built into Visual Studio Code. If you're using Visual Studio, lots of really cool debugging features there as well. And I want to kind of be able to go through it with you, because it's not just using the browser, although that's really what we do, because it's better to test live. But everything else. But for now, what I want to try and do is, when we start off today, I want to start off with the previous project. So let's do this again. So I'm going into my folders. And last day, we worked on a project called COMP125 Lesson 3. And all I'm going to do is duplicate this project today. So I'm just going to kind of duplicate it here. Or you can copy and paste and change the name, right? Now, there's some issues, right? We talked about this before. When you copy a project this way, what you need to do is you need to remove the Git repository that's hidden, right? So on the Mac, right, if you're using a Mac or a Linux machine, you're going to change directory, CD, to the folder, right? And then if you list the folder, it doesn't show it, but if I go ls-al, it shows me that there's a .git folder right here. I want to get rid of it. So I'm going to say remove, rf means recursively, and force the .git folder, right? And it's going to take it away, right? Now, this is very dangerous. Be careful. On the PC, what you do is you would make sure that the .git folder is visible. Right-click, delete. That's all you do, right? So now that the .git folder is gone, right, I can make a new one. So we're going to do almost like we're doing a new commit. Now, my recommendation is, instead of doing this right away, you pull up Visual Studio Code. Since we're mostly using Visual Studio Code here in this class, I'm going to drag and drop this lesson 125 in here, or lesson 4, right? Here we are. This is it. And notice that on the left, if your GitHub is set up properly, and by the way, I know I've set up some people in this class whose Git didn't work on the command line. Please see me if it still doesn't work in command line. I'd like to be able to fix you so that you can do this. You can click here and initialize repository. That's one way of doing it. You could also do it through console. Let's do it here. I'm going to try and do as much as I can here in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to click on Initialize Git Repository. Notice there's a bunch of changes right here. I'm going to add all these changes in for now, all the ones from last day. And I'm going to populate an initial commit based on my last, lesson 3. So we'll say initial commit. Oops. And then click on the check mark. That's good. Now, I'm not going to connect it yet. I want to do initial commit first, but for me to connect it, the steps are, again, I would have to make a Git repository first, a GitHub online. So I go to GitHub. I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to our folder here at Centennial, right? So Centennial College is the organization, and I have some other ones from last week. There's lesson 3 you have from last week. Click New Repository, make a new one. So COMP125, lesson 4. There it is. Click Create Repository, and we're good to go. Now, I have these 2 lines of code. I have to do this way. This is where I need the command line. So I'm going to copy these last 2 lines of code. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. In my project view, I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to open in Terminal. This is going to basically just change directory to my project folder. That's all it's doing. I'm going to right-click here, or actually I just Control V or Command V. On Windows, you'd right-click and press paste, press enter, and now I've connected myself to my repository. Now, see how I worked with there's no me logging in or whatever? You have to set up your credentials, your GitHub credentials on your command line in order for you not to log in, so that way you don't have to always do it. There's a way of doing that. Some people have approached me. I've tried to fix them. The way to do that is to download the standalone version of Git. If I go to download Git, it's a way to fix that. It's not going to take you to GitHub. It's going to take you to git-scm.com/download. So you download the version of Git for you, and then what you do is you follow the way to add in your global credentials, right? So you change your global credentials. So if I was to search for this, global credentials, right? And then you can see that I want to set up this caching your Git password in Git, right? And there's some really good examples of how to do this. Use Credential Helper to do that. Now, this is the Mac version. There's also a way of doing it with WinCred. So if I type in WinCred, Git, then you can look at caching your Git password with Git, and it gives you, oh, that's the same one. Trying to think this one is this one. And it gives you can find it, like this is the exact code, git config -- global credential helper WinCred. You can use this as an example on a Windows machine, and what it'll do is it'll step you through and save your credentials. So there's definitely some online ways of doing this. I've already done it on both Windows and Mac, so it's done. If I refresh my Git repository, by the way, it looks like this. This is from lesson 4. Now, I want to do something different today when it comes to GitHub. One of the things that people have asked me is, hey, how about this README file? Can I add a README file? Yeah, you can, but that means you have to pull it from GitHub to your local repository, because if you don't, then you're going to be out of sync, right? That means there's going to be 2 commits. So far, there's only 1 commit up here. If I click on, so I can see if there's only 1 commit, that's my initial commit, right? But if I do this like remotely, so now I'm just on GitHub. I'm not even touching Visual Studio, and I'm going to add a README file. Usually README files, what they do is they kind of describe, at the very minimum, what your project's about, or they can even be a whole website, basically a little website on how to use your code, your project, right? With almost like a documentation, right? So what I want to put here is, and notice that I have this little pound, hashtag right here. Hashtag on this README file. This is a Markdown file. It's not a markup. It's not HTML. It's MD, Markdown file. Use the first hashtag means an H1 tag, right? 2 hashtags, H2 tag. So if I use 2 hashtags like this, it's hashtag, and I can say something like, COMP125, or this a project to demonstrate debugging techniques. Debugging techniques for COMP125 at Centennial. Right? So let's say I want to do this. Now this is I just typed it in here with a couple of hashtags instead of just 1. Remember, 1 hashtag, H1, a couple of hashtags, H2, which means it's going to come up capitalized. It's going to embold, more or less. Now notice there's a commit new file. It gives me a default way of doing that. So it says create README, right? I'm going to leave it as is. I'm not going to change anything and click commit new file. If I wanted to, I could put my own comments in here, but I'm not going to. When I do that, I have this README file that comes across down here, really big. If I wanted to change it, I can go in and change it as well. But now I have 2 commits online, right? Here's my 2 commits. One is the initial commit. The second one is the README file that I did right online. I didn't touch it at all locally. What to do? Right? I want to put my stuff in sync, right? Well, locally now, if I go back to Visual Studio Code, notice that on GitHub, I can't tell that I'm behind, because GitHub and local Git are not in sync all the time. They're not connected. I just push one time, and then I connect, and then I disconnect. So I don't have a persistent connection. It's just connect, disconnect, just like you do when you kind of FTP. If you use, you FTP up to a site, you push everything to a site. And when you're done, you disconnect. Same thing, right? But if I click these ellipses, I have other options. I can click sync. I can click pull, right? I have nothing to push because I haven't done anything. Let's do a pull to show you this. What pull does, it goes on GitHub, tries to see if there's any changes, and if there are, and there should be because I added a README file, right? Then if I look at my folder, I have my README file now. I pulled it, right? So now you can see this is my README file that I just made up online, right? I'm momentarily connected, only for a second, connected on GitHub, grab my README file. Now I'm in sync. I have 2 commits locally, 2 commits remotely. This process of keeping things in sync is something that you're going to have to do, especially if you're working with a partner or 2. That's why sometimes it's better before you start working on a project that you're collaborating with somebody else on, you do a pull. If you're working on a single branch, right, you do a pull, and you get their changes, you make your changes, you push it back up. They pull your changes down, they make their changes, they push it back up. And it's almost like handing off the project to the other person, right? Almost like a check-in, check-out process. Check in, grab the stuff, do my stuff, check out, push everything up. And then you do check in, pull my changes, do your things, check out, push everything back up. And this check-in, check-out process, or I like to call it passing the baton. You pass the baton to somebody else, they take it, they have the floor, they do their things, they pass it back, right? It's the easiest way to work with it. It's very simple. Where it gets complex is if you're trying to work on the same file at the same time, right? I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that, and both of you trying to push at the same time, which one is it going to be, which commit is going to be the one that comes up. All right, so we're using Visual Studio Code here, and I've got this project. Let's go and fix this. I still got some changes I got to make. Here's my index.html, and notice that in my h1 tag, right? So I've got my navigation that we pulled in. I says less than 3 arrays in control flow. I'm going to change this to less than 4, right? And notice that the title of lesson 4 is debugging and error handling. I'm just going to take this thing right here, and we're just going to put it up here, just so we have the same thing. So that there's no doubt about what we're doing here today, right? And save that. Debugging and error handling is what we're doing. I also have a projects HTML file. This is our projects because we have a couple of, now we have 2 files, index and a projects, maybe an about file, so there's 3. We'll leave those in place. We're not going to change any of this stuff right now, right? But we have just our navigation we can play with, right? One thing to note is that so far we've been using the default Bootstrap library, and I told you that it's okay to use some kind of other Bootstrap theme, right? So let's do that instead. Let's change our Bootstrap theme to a different one, right? And just because I've been asked how to do that, right? So remember that when you grab Bootstrap from the website, under the CSS area, you have bootstrap.css, bootstrap theme.min.css, and so on. And I'm linking to them. I've got my bootstrap.min.css here, and my theme is here, and my font awesome, and so on. If I go to Bootswatch, so if I go back up here, and if I look at Bootswatch, and I have Cyborg, let's go back up one. I want to go to Cerulean. I want to pick this one. So I want my navigation bar to be blue, right? And it gives me a different style. If you preview the theme, you can see that there's what my nav bar is going to look like. There's two different ones. This is the default. This is the inverse. Remember, there's a default and an inverse, right? The light and dark theme. This is the light and dark theme of this theme that we can use, right? Notice that the buttons, there's different buttons here. And depending on what you're looking at, this is the primary, this is your default button, and so on. And they look a little slightly different than the other ones. And this is what your body text will look like, and so on. Your typography is going to be a little bit changed. Your tables gives you examples of how things will work, forms, and so on. All right, so I want to be able to do a slight change to this. And if I want to see how this is working, how do I download this thing? I go back one. Notice that I have 2. I can click the download button. But if I click the download button, I get this. Wow, right? This crazy file, right? It's not what I want. What I want instead is to go down here on the side where there's a little arrow and open it up, and you can choose a couple things. The unmolested version, right? The unminified version. By the way, min stands for minification. That's what you're seeing here. If I click download again, notice that, wow, it looks like crazy, right? This is the minified version of your CSS, right? That's what we're just grabbing. That's the only thing that's changing, your CSS, right? So we want the minified version. We don't want the unminified version because we're not, I'm not going to modify it. But I might as well take all of them, okay? Now, where would I put these things? And what do I do with my original Bootstrap theme and so on? How do I make this work? So, well, let's do this. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to kind of pull this menu down, right-click on bootstrap.min.css here. I'm going to save link as. Notice it's going to give me a little bit of a menu. I'm going to go to my desktop. Here's my desktop. Hit my COMP125. Go right into my lesson 4, into my CSS, right, directly into my CSS. There we go. And notice that there is already a bootstrap min.css in there. Now, the safe thing to do, I'm just going to put it out there to you guys, right, is to rename bootstrap.min.css, the current one, to bootstrap.min.css-.old or something, or old.bootstrap.min.css, something so you have a backup. But for us, we can always download it again. So we're just going to click on save. It's going to ask me to overwrite. Do I want to? I want to replace it. Yes, I do. Bam, done, right? Let's also grab, just for posterity, we're going to grab this one too. Right-click, and we're going to save link as, and it's going to take us to the same place. And I'm going to now notice that I'm going to replace it. So I'm going to go to bootstrap.css, this one, and then save. It's going to ask me to replace. I'm going to say yes, bye. Now there are a couple things that are missing. I don't have a bootstrap.min.theme, and I may have to remove that from my, because I'm using this one. Okay, let's check and see what I'm talking about here. Okay, how do I test this out? Well, I just did this and notice that I have 3 changes. I modified my bootstrap, my index, and my bootstrap.min.css, right? Because it detected the changes. Because I have a Git repository that's tracking or watching my files. That's what it does. And when you install Git, Git is constantly watching your files for changes, right? That's why I'm able to see the changes here in Visual Studio Code, right? Well, let's check out and see what my page looks like. I need to do that. So I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to open in Reveal in Finder or in Explorer if you're a Windows person. And I'm going to go here and double-click on my index.html to see what I got. Okay, this is what my theme looks like, right? Oh man, I don't understand. That doesn't look very different, right? This does. This has changed, right? But this, no, right? And if I click on projects, notice if I hover over, I get a weird different effect. Look at that, right? See how my effect has changed here? But my blue isn't blue. It's this color, right? How do I change that? What do I do? Well, there's a couple things to check. I told you that the theme might interfere. This other file here, this theme.min.css here, let's comment it out to see what happens, right? So I'm going to comment it out. So I'm going to go in here in HTML. Let's see if this takes care of it, right? And I'm going to kind of save it, right? This is just in my About page. So we'll do the same thing in my other pages for now, so we can see what that looks like. So here's my CSS on my index.html. Right, so I'm just going to kind of put it in there. And we'll do the same thing for projects. Right, because remember, I have 3 separate pages, so I have to do this 3 separate times. Okay, good. So I've done it everywhere. And let's go back to my page here and refresh to see what I get. Hey! So I can't use my bootstrap-theme.min.css because it messes me up. If I want the cerulean theme, and I want it to truly be blue like this, and by the way, this is the inverse, so that's why it's dark. If I wanted to make it the light blue, right, which is also good, then I have to go back into my pages, and where it says navbar inverse on line 19 approximately, then I would just change this to navbar default, right? So I'm going to just take this navbar default thing and put it on each page. So that's each page has to be done because that's each one of them has navbar inverse, right? And let's go to my index.html too. There it is. Default. And that just gives you a different look and feel. So there we go. Blah, blah, blah. It's done. And let's take a look and see what effect that has. Reverse. A lighter theme. So that's my light theme. That's cerulean, right? With kind of a dark, thing. And I can, as I go back, I can see that, this is what it's going to look like today, right? So switching themes in Bootstrap is really easy, right? And actually, the great thing about it is it's all responsive theming, right? So if I go down here, I can still see this thing on the side and so on. It really gives you a very flexible way of doing things. Now, this is only one. There's other sites out there as well. I'm not going to explore those sites today, but I wanted to give you this so that way you could certainly decide to use a different theme, colors, and everything else very simply by going to Bootstrap, Bootswatch, right? This site. And if you're not happy with the theme, that's okay. You can change it again. Right? So for example, I think cerulean to me is a little bit too happy and bright. I want to make mine a little darker and darker, you know, deeper and darker and darker, right? So maybe I'll choose something else, right? Like for example, I like the blue, but I like maybe this kind of blue, right? With darkly. And could you mix and match? Absolutely. But then it's going to take some custom work on your part. And this isn't a CSS course. It's putting it out there, right? I don't expect you to do custom CSS work here unless you really want to, right? And which is good practice. So I can choose one of these things that I like. So the only other blue thing I see is, I mean, I could go with back to the inverse because I think I might have liked that more. So go with this inverse. I could also go with darkly, but I'm not sure if I want a black background, right? I'm not sure if I want this black background. If I preview it, it looks like this. I also notice that the buttons are green, right? Not sure if I like that, right? Always preview your stuff. You never know what you're going to get, right? This isn't bad. This flatly is okay. Let's preview this one. And you can see that there's so a couple of things. One of them is this is the default, and this is the inverse, right? So you see there's a green theme underneath here, right? And it talks about the buttons and the styles and everything else. Not bad. Actually, it's not a really bad theme at all. I like this one. And it has really interesting gray tones that I can use, right? With different buttons. Even my default buttons look pretty nice. I don't even have to go with a primary, right? And so on. So I think it's not bad. I think maybe I want to use this one instead. All right, what do I do? I'm going to show you one more time what to do. Go back, right? So I want to use this one, this flatly one. I'm going to go to this one, right-click, and save link as into my folder. Make sure that it's not one, that it's actually the right one, bootstrap.min.css, right? So it's this one. Save, replace. And just for posterity, I don't need to, but I'll right-click and do the same thing with bootstrap.css. Save link as, bootstrap.css. And save. And now when I go back to my page, I can refresh, and I'll get my different theming right away. Right? So it switches what it's going to look like. And you know what? I'm not sure I'm happy with the green. You know, see the green? Not sure I'm happy with this. But for now, for today, we'll deal with it. I'll eat the green, even though I don't like it. I'll eat it, you know, because I don't have time to fool around like this too much. Questions around theming. It's not that difficult. If you really want to, you can make your own. Right? It's not a big deal. There's all kinds of tutorials out there to make your own Bootstrap compatible theme. It's not a big problem. Yes? Not going to talk about templates. No time today. Okay, so I've got my theme. I'm talking about error handling and debugging. Let's modify it a little bit more. So I'm going to go back into my app.js, which is under scripts. And we did all this stuff with paragraphs before, with paragraph, and we were working with arrays really quickly. And one of the things that I'm surprised is that you guys all understood this, right? Because I did it quick, and it was at the end. We only had one class last week, right? So, and this is okay. Everyone worked out with this one. Everyone understood how this works. Again, I think the takeaway from arrays, just to review arrays again, is, and by the way, arrays and array stuff, conditional statements, all those kind of things. Those are free for me to ask, freebies for me to ask about on your test coming up, little quiz, this Wednesday. So Wednesday, please be on time. First 10 minutes of class, I'm going to do a quiz. 10 minutes after class, so let's say, for example, on Wednesday we start at 12:30. So 12:40, the quiz is over, right? It'll be closed. So please be on time, right? But if you notice this stuff we talked about, remember arrays, and this is, again, some of the most misunderstood parts. There are two different ways to declare arrays. I'm going to move this up here for a second because I kind of put it down here. This is one way, and this is the second way. The second way is with this new array syntax, right? It's identical in terms of the way it works. Most people in JavaScript, when they want to declare an empty array, do this, all right? Not to say that this isn't right. In fact, this makes more sense. If you're a Java person or a C# person, you might want to do this way because it might be comfortable for you, right? But this definitely is the most common way of doing things, right? This square bracket, square bracket. Now remember that there's different ways to initialize arrays. You can initialize them after like this, how I initialize each one. And what I'm doing here is I'm making a reference, pulling a reference from paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and taking that reference information and storing it inside my array elements, 0, 1, and 2, right? Inside my paragraph elements array, right? That's what this does. There's 2 arrays here. The second one is a paragraphs array, which holds the paragraph data, right? So I make an empty array, and then I basically allot the paragraph data, so paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, inside 0, 1, and the elements 0, 1, and 2, right? Now here is the tricky part, right? This is this. I compress this into one little for loop, right? And I do 2 things at once here. First of all, I check to see how many paragraph elements I have. Right now, I notice that I have 3. 1, 2, 3, right? So paragraphs elements.length. Length is actually a property of all arrays, right? All arrays have additional properties and methods, right? We haven't talked about array methods and properties too much. We will later on when we do a few more advanced things. We just scratched the surface and so we know how to declare arrays, but really haven't talked about any special effects for arrays, right? But for now, if you notice, this length property measures how many how many elements we have in the array. Now this, I'll tell you right now, from an efficiency perspective, is bad form. Not this, the whole thing. Rather this up here inside my header, the header of my for loop. Why? Because this is a property, and it keeps checking the property every single time the for loop is iterated, right? Every time I loop, checks to see how long the array is. And you might see this everywhere on the web. Still wrong. I'm not talking about wrong like it won't work. I'm talking about wrong as in inefficient. Remember we talked about seconds. So what would I do differently? If I was going to refactor this little thing here, how could I refactor this differently so I don't check every time? I could use a for each, but let's not use a for each for now. Huh? I do while, but same, but you could declare it afterwards. You can declare it as a variable. So something like this. Let's say I can make a small variable, called paragraph elements length, like this. Paragraph elements length, right? Small variable, and I can make it equal to paragraph elements length, right? That's not going to change in my for loop. It's going to always be the same. Unless I do something like I pop or pull something, right? I'm not going to do that. So therefore, I can replace this piece with a solid value, a constant actually, which is paragraph elements.length, or length, this one. This is actually more efficient than the other way of writing it, even though I'm holding an extra value in memory. This is a better way of writing this array, this loop. Also notice that I'm having an index. An index is a local variable. Index lives and dies inside these curly brace code block, right? So it exists only here. Index does not exist outside of this code block, right? I declare, that's why it's declared inline. I declare it just like you would do in C#, Java, Python, whatever. It's all pretty much the same. Swift, right? You declare when you do a for loop, you declare a variable inline. You initialize it to some value. In this case, it's 0. And then I check the condition, right? And if the condition passes, then I increment my index, right? And I go to the next. I do my iteration. I go through, I iterate, I kind of execute these lines of code, and then I increment everything at the end. All right, by 1. Okay. Now, what happens? Can you change this incrementer? Can you do something at the end? Yeah, you could. You don't have to make it like this. You can make it minus minus, so you can subtract, like a decrement if you wanted to. And by the way, the more efficient way of doing things is taking the length, right? So I know that there's 3 elements, right? Right now the element is 3, but I can't put 3 in here because there is no 1, 2, 3. There's no third element, right? So I have to take this minus 1. So paragraph's length is equal to paragraph's length minus 1. Check this out now. I could do it like this too, right? Right? And now what I want to do is I want to count backwards. So I set up this thing here as paragraph's length minus 1. This paragraph element's length is here, right? That's what my index starts off at, paragraph elements length. Follow me here for a second, right? And what I want to do is I want to say as long as my index, right, is greater than or equal to, if it's greater than or equal to my paragraph element's length, right? So I have to make the check now. I want to basically start counting backwards. So I want to say instead of greater than or equal to paragraph length, I want to say greater than or equal to 0. If it's greater than or equal to 0, right, or greater than 0, right, then count backwards. Count backwards. Keep counting backwards. Now I have to make it so that it's, you know, I come to the point where it's equal to 0. When it's equal to 0, the condition stops, right? Somehow. I have to make sure that happens. So what am I going to check here? I want to count backwards. I want to count back from the length of my array back the other way instead of counting forward. Same thing, right? All I'm doing is counting one way instead of the other way. Well, I need to make this condition work. I start off my paragraphs at whatever the length is, paragraph element's length, which is my value is now 2, right? So I have to check: is my index greater than? Is my index 0, right? If my index is not equal to 0, right, then that's what will be the thing. I could put something like this: not equal to. If it's not equal to 0, that's the condition. Now be careful here because this could promote an error, right? Let's see if this happens. Here's, if my index is not equal to 0, that's what I'm checking, okay? Now this might work okay, right? If it's not equal to 0. But hold on a second. Does that mean that it'll count down to 0? Let's check. Index minus minus instead of plus plus. So I start off at, let's count this through. It starts off at 2. Is it not equal to 0? Yes. Okay. Index 2, context, text content, is equal to paragraphs 2. Okay, cool. Go back up here, right? And I decrement it to 1. Now it's 1. Is my index not equal to 0? Yes. Cool. Now it's 1. It's 1 here. Set this over to 1, right? Decrement it to 0. Is my index not equal to 0? No. Right. So it would fail because I do 2 and 1, but when it equal to 0, I got problems. So what do I want to check? Less than 0. Less than 0. If it's anything that's less than 0 somehow, right? I don't want to continue. Not equal to 0, but less than 0. Let's try this. So if index is less than 0, if it's a -1, right? I want to stop. Let's see if it works. And I want to do the same work that I did before. Remember, we're talking about errors and trying to catch logic errors. Okay, there's 2 different ways. There's syntax errors. Is this a syntax error? Is there any syntax error that you see here? There's no syntax error. So syntactically, it's correct. Logic-wise, though, that's something different. Will it work the way I want it to? And the way to check this, in my opinion, one of the best ways is count it out. Show me my index, my element, when I start off. So here, let's do a console log and put in index to see what my index is. Should start at 2, go down to 1, then go down to 0, right? And then stop. Let's see if that's true with this logic that I put in here. By the way, counting backwards is more efficient loop-wise than counting upwards. Just FYI, all right? If you actually look it up, those are the 2 things. You want to always count backwards in a loop if you want to be efficient, even though it's counterintuitive to the way we think, right? Because we've been trained to count up, right? But actually counting backwards is more efficient. Let's check this out. So go back here to my thing, and I'm going to go to my home page and refresh, right? And what I'm going to do is notice that I lost my page here. Something happened, right? What happened? Let's take a look at in the inspector and see what's going on. If I go to my console log, I got nothing. There's no error. Projects, I click on projects, I got nothing. No error, right? About me, nothing, right? Why? How come? There's no error, right? But I got a problem, and that's not even getting there. Remember my logic, right? Is index less than 0? No, right? It's never going to be less than 0. Therefore, it will never work. Guys, I'm tricking you. Like I'm telling you, help me out here. Let's make this for loop, right? This is the condition to check to make sure that it's true. I'm not checking to see if it fails, right? So what's the condition that says it's true? It can't be less than 0. It's got to be greater than 0, right? Well, is greater than 0? If is 2 greater than 0? Yes. Is 1 greater than 0? Yes. Is 0 greater than 0? No. So let's try that, right? So again, it's not a syntax error, it's a logic error, right? Let's talk this out again. Talk about errors and debugging today, right? So let's talk about the errors first, then we'll talk about debugging. All right, and let's refresh. Oh, 2, 1, 0. This is good. Home, 2, 1, 0. And look, I got my paragraphs now, right? 2, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0. No errors, right? So 2, 1, 0 means it's going through the loop 3 times, like I feel like it should, right? So now I know that it's working. I'm getting my paragraph text, even though it's silly, little paragraph text that I got going on, right? But let's make a bigger example. Let's make that paragraph stuff much larger, right? So we know it's there. I'm going to add in a Lorem Ipsum. I'm going to get it from Lorem Ipsum. If you want to go online, by the way, if you say Lorem Ipsum generator, right? Lorem Ipsum generator generates a bunch of text like this, right? So I want to kind of grab this, text and says, see how many paragraphs you have? 5 paragraphs. I only have 3 paragraphs, right? And I want, start with the word lorem. Sure, generate. There's my 3 paragraphs in my Lorem Ipsum. It's actually www.lipsum.com/feed/HTML. I'm going to grab my first paragraph of text. And what I want to do here, I want to somehow add this in, right? Remember what we talked about? A couple ways to do this. If I go back to my code, right, and I want to add it into this, notice that it's like really long, right? Way over here. And again, I'm gonna put this in here so you can see it. I'm gonna toggle word wrap on for a second so you can see this thing. I'm just gonna populate this thing in here. So I'm gonna kind of take this in the first paragraph and just pop it in, right? So there's my Lorem Ipsum text, my first paragraph, right? Notice that I don't have any errors when I do this because I've turned on word wrap in my editor, right? But it also pushes everything down, so you can see the paragraph. Okay, let's take a look at the same thing. So I'll do the second paragraph just to give us a little bit more meat to deal with, so it's not just like one line, right? Again, we'll do the same thing. I'm gonna go to the end here, and it's a little different at the beginning, so we can tell it's my first paragraph. I'm just adding it on so we have more meat. I'm just gonna put in paste, and the last one, very long. Copy, and go to the end here, and press paste. There we go. So bigger paragraphs. Now I'm going to turn off word wrap, so I don't have to see those anymore. I know they're there, but it's really long, way long, way over here, right? And we know it's pretty long text. That's the way you would do it, by the way, if you're going to add in some text for yourself. Don't kill yourself, eh? Like make it so that's copy and paste. Do it in a Word or some kind of Word editor or word processor. Drop it in. And let's take a look what I get here. If I go back to, let me kill this. I'm going to go back to here and refresh. Here's about me, a bunch of paragraph stuff. Here's my projects, and here's my home. You can see that it's all a big paragraph now, right? And you can see that it's different. This is my first paragraph. This is my second paragraph. And here's my third paragraph, right? And if you want to highlight the words, paragraph, right? Or third paragraph, or one of those kind of things. What can I do, right? What can I do from a CSS perspective to look at the word paragraph? I want to find the word paragraph in anytime I have the word paragraph inside my paragraph, anywhere in there, I want to make it bold. What can I do? Because remember, I'm using JavaScript, so it's not even there in the page, right? How can I affect what my page will look like after it's been generated by JavaScript? Because you may have to do this. What do I do? Is there a way to do it? Event? I could do that, but one thing to note is that it's all CSS right now. We're not a CSS course, but if I was to go there, and if I look, I have my own custom CSS, right? App.css right here. My app.css is kind of empty, right? And what I want to do is I want to search for the text in my paragraph, right? And I'm going to change something that's in my paragraph that has a word combination, paragraph, right, as an example. And I want to make it bold, which is we're going to change the style of the word to bold. How do we do that? So let's say you don't know. First of all, anyone know how to do it? I want to ask that question. Nobody knows. Okay, let's look it up. All right, so I want to change this stuff. That's what I would do. If I didn't know, if I was learning, I would say change word in paragraph to bold, CSS. Okay. HTML text formatting, how to bold words within a paragraph. Right, there we go. That might be better. Just give me some examples. Oh, P strong. Okay, this is the HTML version. We don't want that. We want it so it's inside using CSS. So I want to use a query to find the words. Right, so this isn't the solution. Right, text formatting, bolding text. This is exactly the same thing. I don't want to do it HTML wise. I want to search for a word, right, or the first letter of something, and I want to change it in, how to bold a word in a sentence in CSS. Okay, let's try this. La la la. How to put backlines. Step 1, open the HTML document, place your cursor before the word that you want to place, and step 3, use a span tag. I have nothing to wrap through, right? Well, here's one thing. I have the text, right? I have the text, but I want to be able to, target that text. Here's something that I want to ask you. I'm replacing the text content, right? But now what I really want to do is I want to be smart about it, right? Because I have full control with my JavaScript. Do I have to use text content, right? I probably wouldn't do it this way now that I'm thinking about it. I probably would do it like this. I won't even use CSS. I'm going to go back to JavaScript, right? Since we're doing with JavaScript anyway. And here's these long paragraphs, right? Paragraph 1, 0, 1, 2, right? And this is paragraph data. That's what this is. This is just the actual text. But what we're doing is we're using this text content property, right? Text content. Do I want text content or inner HTML? Because if I make it inner HTML, I can actually inject HTML tags along with my text, right? Along with my text. So I can target that way as well. And I have to make sure that it's compatible with Bootstrap, right? So if I'm going to be compatible, I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com, right? Because we're using Bootstrap as our main CSS engine, if you will, right? And I'm going to click on CSS. On the right, there's something called typography. Take a look. Under typography, it tells us how to do certain things, headings, body copy, right? And I want to do things like lead body copy, right? Make a paragraph stand out by using the, what we call it, lead, right? There it is. So I want to do that. I notice that I have a class lead for a certain thing. I can do that. What else can we do? Mark text, highlighted, right? Deleted text, strike through text, inserted text, underlined text, small text. Whoa, bold. I use strong, which is that's what bolds the text for me in Bootstrap. It actually does that. Okay, cool. So I use strong tags, and I'm going to put that around my paragraph, and I want to inject the tags inside my CSS as well, inside my my document. Not just words, but also tags. And I'm going to let Bootstrap do all the work for me. Beautiful. Let's see how this works. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to add the tags in there. So I'm going to type it in by hand, strong. And I'm going to say this is my first paragraph. I'll do this first part here, right? And we'll do the same thing, strong. And just to be I'm lazy, I'll copy this, and I'll paste it here and here. And I'll take this piece, and I'll type it here and here. Now, just a note of caution. If I leave it the way it is written with text content down here, right, I'm going to get the following. Let me show you what I'm going to get. Here, if I refresh, I want to see the tags, right? Strong, strong. That's not what I want, right? Because this is text content, right? That's the property that I'm using. I don't want to use text content. I want to use inner HTML. And I can find that out by typing this and start typing inner HTML. Or if I go inner HTML, right? Notice that's not coming up, by the way. Let me show you that again. So if I go dot, and these are all the different ones I have, I'm not getting my code hinting here. And there's a reason for that, by the way. But let's just type inner HTML. Okay, so that's the one I want. So save. Let's see if this works, right? So inner HTML, right? And if I go back to here and I refresh, right, now it's bolded, right? Because when I put inner HTML, I convert my paragraph into HTML. It's not just text, right? So I can add whatever HTML I want. Doesn't show up. So, well, you have to try it again. So you notice that it's there, right? Here's my first tag. And what about if I want to make this bigger, right? I want to make my inner HTML slightly larger than this. Instead of strong, what could I do if I want to make custom HTML, custom CSS, right? I could use spans, right, with an ID, span ID of, or span class, right? And I could say, maybe I want to make this 12 pixels or whatever it's going to be, right? So instead of bold, right, I don't want to make this the style bold. I want to make it, instead of just using strong. Strong is the built-in one through Bootstrap. I'm just talking about CSS really briefly, all right? But also I want to make it so that it stands out even more than that, right? I mean, I could use an H3 tag or something, but it's incorrect semantically to use a heading tag is only for headings, right? So we want to kind of use a span tag that kind of surrounds this stuff, and then make it my own class. Maybe I might make my class called, you know, first sentence, something like that, first sentence. And if it's got a class of first sentence, then it's bold and it's larger than the regular text. What's the default size of my regular text, body text? Anybody know? Huh? Yes. No one knows. Okay. Let's go back. This is all reviewing. So we'll leave it like this. But instead of having these strong tags, we'll change this to a span. So I'll change this to span, right? Span allows us, by the way, I could have done it with strong too, but why? I mean, strong is good, but I might as well, I'll make my own custom CSS here, right? And we'll just put those in here as spans, right? Closing tags. And I'm not quite done yet. Oops. I also want to add a class, which I didn't do because I'm just being lazy. Hold on a second here. I apologize. Class is equal to, again, we'll call it first sentence, really big. First sentence. Oh, I got a problem. How come I have a problem? Huh? I got quotations within quotations is why, right? So I don't want to do that. I can use single quotes, right? Inside double quotes. Take care of my issue, right? I could do a backslash too, but this is fine too, right? And now I can kind of copy this again. Sorry. So I'm actually kind of coding the CSS, the HTML as I go. There we go. First sentence, first sentence, first sentence. They each have the same class, but they're different paragraphs on different pages, right? Let's check this out. Now I have to code this to do something. You know what? Let's also make it blue, right? Just to make it really, you know, stand out, like a dark blue, right? So I'm going to go to CSS. Let's go to app.css, and we're going to create our own custom class called first sentence. And inside my first sentence class, we're going to make it, first of all, we'll color it blue, just to show that that's true. So we'll say maybe dark blue. So it stands out. If you want to make it light blue, that's fine too, but dark blue kind of goes with our theme, right? And you can also change the color, make sure what the theme colors are. You can find them out if you really want to. And then we want to, you know, do a style. What's the style? How do I make it bold, guys? No. What's the CSS to make it bold? Huh? No. Huh? No, CSS, not font dash style. Thank you. Font dash style, right? And is equal to, if I want to say bold, I could do that. You can also decide on how much you want to make it. Like for example, font bold, font style, you know, italic, normal. You can also notice that there's other options here. Italic and normal. Oblique would be the other one, right? And we want to choose bold, right? To see what that is. That's cool. So we want to bold it. Or would it be font weight? Right? Instead of font style, it's font weight bold. There it is. And then instead of font weight bold, then we want to try something else. So font weight bold, we also want to make it bigger. So font dash size, right? And let's make it. I'm going to use M's. Okay, M's are you know, something that's more responsive, right? I'm going to use M's instead of actual pixels because it's better. And normally it's 1 M is the standard size. We're going to make it 1.1 M, so it's quite large. And let's see what that gives us. So 1.1 M, and only for the first sentence. Okay, let's go back to our page here and refresh. And you can see that now it's much larger, right? And it's blue. Okay, if you don't really believe me, right, let's make this even bigger, 1.2 M. Also, sometimes what you want to do is, remember, we're not changing the weight of anything else, just that these lines. So the problem sometimes will be if I make it too big, it's going to spill over into this side, right? Just FYI. So if I refresh, you can see that this is my second paragraph comes out, right? So it looks like special effects, right? But it's really not special effects. I'm just injecting HTML and I'm adding CSS. That's the easy way. Questions around this? I know it's not really debugging and error handling, but it's, yes? I don't know why it doesn't work for you. Something's wrong, right? I don't know. You made a mistake, right? Let's upload my GitHub and then you see. So let's make. So now I've made some changes. I've modified my paragraphs. I've modified my app.js. I've modified my app.css. You can see that I have a bunch of changes here, and I've updated my project. Is really what I've done. So I'll say updated project, right? And you know, I've put this up here, and I'm going to push everything up to GitHub. All right, when I'm pushed to GitHub, now everything's up to date. Hey, while we're at it, let's connect to Azure, because you know what? In your tests or in your assignments, there's going to be 4 marks for GitHub and 4 marks to Azure, or if you're not using Azure because you somehow can't make it work after the 4th week of class, and you're using the local school thing as well, that's fine. I will accept it, right? But you know, I highly recommend you make your fixes so that it works with Azure, because we're going to be using Azure in other courses, right? Just FYI, right? So it's good to fix it up. All right, so how do I do that? Remember, in Azure, we kind of go up here, and I'm going to kind of kick off a portal.azure.com. And in here, what I want to do is I'm going to create a new site so you guys can check it out live as well. I'm going to click New. I'm going to go Web and Mobile, right? And I'm going to click New Web App. And we're going to call this COMP125 Summer 2016 Lesson 4, right? And in here, I'm going to choose. Oh, this is different. Hey, they changed something in Azure every single week. Okay, it's crazy, right? I'm going to use Canada East, and I'm going to click Pin to Dashboard and Create. Awesome. I love when they make changes. These people, these Microsoft people, right? Who says they're supposed to notify us? They don't care. They're not going to notify anybody, right? You have to keep doing it. If you're a regular user of Azure, you're going to be up to date. If you're not a regular user of Azure, too bad, right? All right, so when the deployment dance is done up on Azure, Azure, again, is a cloud service, platform as a service, right? Infrastructure as a service, right? And what's happening is it's created a container for my web app, right? This is what this is. I want to go down to publishing and click deployment source. By the way, you could also use FTP if I really wanted to, right? If I wanted to use that, but I'm going to use my deployment source as GitHub. There it is. And I'm going to click on No Performance Tests. I'm going to click on instead of Personal, I'm going to go to Centennial, where we are today. My project should be the last one that I made, COMP125 Lesson 4. There it is. And I'm going to click OK. Now, if everything goes well, it's going to go out, grab stuff from GitHub, and throw it into my repository. And you're going to have a link that's available online anywhere in the world, right? Because it's live, right? And this is the best way to test. The best way to test is physically on Azure, because then you'll have all your errors and problems and everything else, right? Which is important to try. Locally, it might work. Remotely, somehow it doesn't. What happened? Something you did wrong. Or maybe you didn't send everything to GitHub. You know, there's always errors. So you always test the production site once you're done, you know, your development version in your local repository. Also, sometimes what we have is something called deployment slots, where I have an active deployment slot, and I have you know, kind of a passive one, or one that's inactive. And what I can do is I can deploy my GitHub to my the one that's not active, and when it's working, so I can check, I can swap out my deployment slots. So when I know that it's working, I can make it so one slot deploys over the other. And that's kind of outside the scope of this course, but that's how you do it. You have more than one deployment slot, and you can kind of swap one version for another instead of just doing the same way I'm doing it right now. Remember, I'm using continuous deployment in this example, which means every time I make a change to GitHub, I make a change to Azure. Let's test my site to make sure it works. Right, if it works, then I'm going to get the same stuff. There it is, my first paragraph. Also notice that if I check on the inspector, if I check my console, I'm going to get a few errors, right? Why are these errors? Should you be worried about them? You know, is this, we're talking about error handling today, and so on. How do I fix these errors, and so on. We're going to talk about fixing it. It won't be today, but there's a way of fixing it up on Azure, and it's nothing to do with our code. It has to do with Azure. You need something called the web.config file configured to make this all work properly. And why? Because it's trying to read things from something called a WAF file, and this is inside Font Awesome. Also, we're missing something called a favicon, which we don't have. And if I put the favicon in place, then it wouldn't give me this last error, right? What's a favicon? It's a little tiny thing that comes at the top of your site, right here on your URL, and you can make that your own. Something that's like, I don't know, a castle, right? Maybe I'm going to make a castle favicon that kind of goes right here, right? And then it wouldn't give you this error anymore because it's always looking for a favicon. If it doesn't exist, it'll give you this error. If I refresh, errors still go. That favicon error goes away, but these two errors stay because the problem is that these errors here are Azure errors. Okay, they're looking for, they don't understand how to get to these WAF files. Now for us, it's not really that important, but in the future, it may make a difference. We'll fix that later. All right, so we can ignore them. If we're testing live with Azure, please ignore those three errors for now. They're not real errors. Locally with your code, they're errors. We have to configure Azure, the provider, to work properly. All right. Okay, so we've got this all working. You can see that it's working. And again, I like some of it. There's some pieces I don't like the hover effect. Not sure I like that hover effect. And how do I change that hover effect when I hover over? You'd have to know the CSS class to change that in Bootstrap. And we can look at that another day. Okay, so back to this. So we've done one simple change. We made our first sentence. Not really much of anything new or crazy. I just want to put that in there. And we changed our theme today, right? Because I want to, some people may have questions around that. I want to make a theme, but I don't want to make it black like yours, Tom. Yeah, okay. I mean, there's lots of stuff you can do. Please don't make it black. Please don't make it like, you know, don't use my icons. Please, I'm asking you. Whatever you do, don't use the, you know, the castle icon for your logo. Make your own, right? Making a logo takes like literally 10 minutes. You know, if you want to spend a little bit of time on it, it could take 2 seconds if you just put a circle with your name, with your initials in there, right? It really doesn't take a lot of effort, you know, to put it together. And remember that you might want to show this site to possible employers in the future, so you want to make it as nice as you can, right? And that's why you're getting 15% for this thing, right? It's not a small little assignment. It's kind of like between an assignment and a project. It gives you a chance to show me your HTML5 and CSS3 chops, right? And then at the same time, we can use JavaScript. We can use it as a vehicle, you know, to add stuff to it as we go. With the next assignment, the next assignment, the next assignment will all be around your portfolio site. Which, by the way, the next assignment's coming on Wednesday. Right? We'll talk about Wednesday. You'll get another assignment, and you'll have a couple weeks or a week, maybe a week to get this one done. It's a smaller assignment. Okay, Wednesday, it's coming. All right. So I know you're laughing at me. Another assignment. Yeah. I have to give you these things. All right, so let's take a look. You know, so if I go back to my scripts, under scripts, I have app.js. Again, I've done a couple of things differently today. I'm stepping down instead of stepping up. I've also declared a paragraph elements length variable, and what I'm doing is I'm calculating the paragraph elements dot length -1, because if I remember, like I said before, paragraph elements length dot length calculates how many actual elements there are, and there are 3, but I can never go. My index can never go to 3 because that would be index out of range. That's the error that I would get. Let's check this out. So here's, if I don't make this like this, if I change this to just paragraph elements length, danger, it's not going to work. Let's see what the error that I'm going to get is. We're talking about errors today. And if I go back to home and refresh, right, and if I go back to inspect, you can see that I got 210. Wait, that's on Azure. If I refresh, and if I go to inspect, right, I have 3210. Well, 3, you know, that's interesting. It starts at 3. Is there a 3? Right? If I go to projects and if I go to About Me, right? But here's something interesting. Even though I don't have a 3, what is element 3, right? Didn't fail. How come? It should fail, right? Because there is no element 3. And in other languages, you get an index out of range error, but not so in JavaScript. It fails silently, right? So what is the value of this element? How do I check it? Let's check it out. So I'm not just doing a console.log anymore with an index, right? I'm just counting the index. I want to look at and see what my paragraph elements index is, right? Paragraph elements index, whatever that is. And look what it says. This is what's saving us. If paragraph elements index exists. Well, no, it doesn't exist, and that's where we're not getting an error, right? I can count as many times as I want, Tom. But you know what? These lines right here are saving me from having that error because it's checking to see if it exists. That's what this does. Remember what I said? If you just put this in, paragraph elements index, right? It checks to see if it's there, right? If it is there, then it returns true. If it's not there, it will return false. And if it's false, it'll skip this paragraph, right? So let's just not do that, right? And cause an error. So underneath our console log, between each one of our countings, we'll do a paragraph elements index. Let's copy and paste this piece. So we have a problem, but my system is not able to detect it, right? For now, it's ignoring the error, right? It's ignoring the error. Here it is. Let's show the error. Let's see how this works. So here, go back to here, and refresh. Oh, so I get undefined, and I get null null. That's different things. My number 2 actually shows my paragraph. If I actually look in there, I can see that I have access to my whole paragraph here, right? Number 2. Why? Because I'm on the About Me page, and this is my third paragraph. 0, 1, 2. So 1, 2, third paragraph. That's what this is. Remember, because 2 is actually the third paragraph. The third element. 0, 1, the first element, the second element, the third element. My third paragraph, that's why this is showing up. This is showing undefined. Why? Is undefined a variable, a value? Yeah, it's valid, and so is null. These are null. This is undefined. Okay, let's go to my other one, home. Now I got my paragraph 1 here, right? You can see that in home, this is my first paragraph. I got a lot more detail here too, right? And I got null, null, undefined, right? So I'm not getting an error. Even though I haven't declared my array of a certain length, I don't declare it, it's just undefined. There's no definition for it. And that's JavaScript's way of saying, instead of causing an error, JavaScript is so flexible in that it'll continue, right? Because remember, this is a data type. Even though JavaScript here is showing me that my data type should be elements, it actually allows other kinds of data types for free. It's not going to complain, right? If I put in integers or nulls or undefineds or booleans or whatever, it'll hold inside my array. It'll hold whatever you want, any kind of a data or object that you want. So projects, it's this one, right? About Me, it's this one. You can see how the paragraph moves from one element to the other. Okay, that's all it's doing. It's actually the only one that's being defined is the one that exists, because this one doesn't exist. This one doesn't exist. This one is not even defined. There's no definition for it. I've never assigned it at all, right? So therefore, I'm only showing this one. So even though you're thinking it should be an error, and it should, may not error out. So be careful, please. In JavaScript specifically, the most difficult kinds of errors are these to find. This is an error. This is incorrect, and it might trip us up later on. It might give us incorrect output that we don't expect to get. Let's put it back to -1 to show you what I'm talking about. So if I put this back to -1, this is the correct thing to do. And if I refresh now, you can see that error, the undefined, goes away, and it goes from 0, 1, 2. Yes? There's no error. There's no error, right? If there was an error, then my exception handler will pick it up, right? But there's no error. Undefined is not an error. Undefined is a logic issue, right? I can look for undefined. I can say if the type is undefined, right? If it's equal to undefined, then it's an error, right? Show an error, right? By the way, when I do console.log, one thing to also note, if I go back to here, right? We're talking about errors today, right? So remember that console.log, the console is an object. It's actually window.console. That's what it really is, right? The window.console. Window is the object. Console is the method. Log, right, is what I'm trying to do. Actually, it's one of, after the window actually is the large class, if you will, or the actual the object I'm looking at. I can keep drilling down, and it accepts console.log because we're part of the Windows namespace, window namespace. But I have other things I can do with my console. And if you notice, there's console.assert. I can do that, right? Console.assert. And I can actually do a test. So I can check to see if one thing is equal to another, right? Console.clear, console.count, console.debug. Console.error. There's another one, right? Let's use console.error and see what I get. So console.error, and I want to put in here some text. You know, this is an error, right? I want to do that every time I iterate, right? So console, instead of console.log, I'm going to use console.error. And you know what? Let's make this one here console.log and this one here console.debug to show you the differences. By the way, they're a little different each time, right? Let's see how this goes. Console.index, console.log, debug, and error. Okay, let's try this out and see what I get. Refresh. Oh, here's what an error looks like. I'm generating the error, right? Whenever I put console.error, I can make an error happen on the console, right? Notice that it even counts the number of errors that are in here. These are custom errors that can come up, right? The second one is console.debug, right? So console.debug is this one. Notice that there's no change. Console.log is the first one. Console.debug is the second one. Console.error is the third one. Console.debug, right? Even if I click on the other ones, there's no difference, right? There's no difference between one and another, right? There's no difference. Console.debug, console.log. Okay. Any questions so far about this stuff? So console.error actually does. It creates an error. Let's talk about other kinds of console commands we can use, right? Then we'll take a short break because people are getting tired, right? I go console. Right? And if you look at other options, info, here's one, console.info. This is info. There we go. And actually, we'll just change this so you can see the differences. Console.info. Instead of this one being an error, we'll just say console.debug. This is debug. This is debug. Right? And this is log. Instead of index, now we'll just say this is log. This is debug. This is an error. This is info, right? So you can see the differences in the different commands, what they do. All right. Refresh. Take a look at debug, how it's blue. Sometimes what we want to do is do this. We want to use debug because what debug does, it comes up as blue. Black tells us everything is okay, right? Where's info? Well, here it is. Look, it has a little info sign out next to it. How come I didn't get it up here? Info, 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 but I didn't. Oh, there's three. 1, 2, 3. So I'm doing it backwards. That's why. So I notice that info gives us a little sign. It's info. X is an error, and then debug is blue. So info is not bad either, right? Info is pretty cool to use because it kind of marks things differently than when you do your debugging, right? All right. What else? Console. You can see that there's a bunch of different ones. Clear, assert. I want to see one that makes sense that we would use sometimes. Profile, select, time, trace. Warn, that's one we use. That's what I wanted. Console.warn. This is a warning. And by the way, why would I care? As a JavaScript developer, why would I care to put these things in the console, right? I want you to think about this for a second when we do this. So this is console.warn. Oops, not that one. This one, refresh. Okay, there's warn. Take a look, by the way, how warnings, and errors can kind of like map out on the console. And my debugging tools, inside of my inside Chrome, you can see that the developer tool shows me how many errors and warnings. So why would I put errors and warnings on my console? Why would I do that? Anybody? Guys, you're going to be tested on this thing, so you may want to ask some questions, right, or answer. Why would I put errors and warnings on my console as a developer? On purpose. Yeah. Yeah, but also to tell other developers what's going on. Like, let's say, for example, I have a method that's deprecated. What's deprecated mean? What's deprecated mean? Deprecated. I'll spell the word for you so you can see it. How about you would look it up so you can see what it means? Deprecated, right? Deprecate. Another term for depreciate. Deprecation actually in software terms means not used anymore, or we moved on from it, right? That's what I want you to think of it like. So it means that we don't use it anymore, or we have an old method that we want you not to use anymore. Please don't use this deprecated method, right? We want you to use this new method, right? And we put it inside of our warnings to tell our other developers that are using our code, hey, don't use this thing because now we've moved on to version 2. You're using code from version 1. We're giving backwards compatibility to that code, so it'll still work, but I highly don't recommend you use it because it might be unstable now in our new version. Deprecated. Okay, so that's what you might get. So that's any kind of warnings you want to give other developers. That's a great method to do that. We can color code our debugging as opposed to making it boring black, right? So we might want to do this. Like, hey, give a warning when we go outside the bounds. We're playing we have a player and he's going outside the bounds, whatever. Give us a warning or give us an error if, as an example, there's something that's going on that we should get an error from, right? And we can also do stuff like in the console, even though we want to, it's for us, if something's not working and it's not throwing an error, we can throw it for him. Okay, one more, and then we'll stop, I swear. All right, so console.warn. How about console.assert? Here's our assert. And if you notice, it says, here's my test, right? Here's my test. And there's a message, right? If I fail or pass, right? Test is usually a Boolean, right? And we can say something like this. If, paragraph elements length, right? As an example, paragraph's element length is greater than 0, right? That's the test. Is it true? Then we have everything is passing. If it's false, if it's less than 0 somehow, we want to give an error, right? So paragraph, we can do that. Paragraph elements length, right, is greater than 0, not equal to 0, right? Then we can do something like index greater than 0. You can kind of put that out. See what happens with this thing. So I'm checking to see if my paragraph element's length is greater than 0. My guess is my index will be greater than 0, right? Well, actually, that's not true. Let's try to do this. We'll say index. We'll say instead of paragraph element's length, we'll say index. Index is greater than 0. This is our test. So the first piece is our test, and the second piece is my message if I pass or fail the test. By the way, there's other options. If I go comma, you can see there's other options in here. I'm not going to do that right now. Let's see what I get with my assert and what color I get, if I get anything. Refresh. This is info, this is log, this is an error, this is a warning, this is log. I don't get anything, right? Oh, here's one. Assertion failed. Index is greater than 0. Look. It's almost like a little test, yeah? I'm testing to see if my index is greater than 0, but it wouldn't be anymore, right? So we should get an assertion failed, right? And that's why, because my index is not greater than 0, right? So far my assertion is passing. I'm checking to see if my index is greater than 0. This is a great way to test a for loop, by the way, right? If I look over here, I'm looping through, right? And when my index becomes less than 0, which it would, right? Remember, I'm testing for greater than or equal to 0, right? And my index will eventually be, right? My index will be, there will be a chance where my index will be equal to 0, right? So therefore, it'll fail when it becomes equal to 0, right? Also, if I want my index to be less than, here's my assertion. If I ever have an index, this is how you can test this problem up here. If I want my index to be less than paragraph element's length, this piece, right? So I want to test to see if this is true. So I always want my index to be less than paragraph elements length. Otherwise, I'll say something like, you know, paragraph elements length, or index out of bounds. We'll say index out of bounds. We'll make our own error. Index out of bounds. Index out of bounds if we fail. Right? This is an assert. So it's just a console, little test to make sure that it's it'll show us our problems on the console. We can actually embed these things inside each function. Right? All right, let's check this out and see what happens. So refresh. And there's nothing, right? Because my index is not out of bounds, right? Now let's make my index go out of bounds like we did before, right? How do I do that? I take this away, right? So now it starts off at 3. If my index, look what my test is. If my index is less than my paragraph element's length somehow, if it's not true, right? My index starts off at paragraph element's length. Is that ever going to happen? No, right? Maybe what I want to try and say is I want to make it less than 3, an actual number. Right? So if my index is less than 3, everything's okay, right? But if it's equal to 3, it's going to give me this index out of bounds, right? Which it would. So I can test to see if this is true. Let's check it. So, and there's different ways you can do this. So little tests, really quickly. For people who are doing C# with me, you know how difficult it is to make a test. You have to make a whole project, a method. This is really quick and easy, a dirty way of doing kind of a test if you want. And let's check this out. So I'll get the first one, right, where it says assertion failed, index out of bounds, because there is no index 3, but the rest of them will be fine, right? So you can do all these kinds of custom testing and everything else in here. So before we pause for a break, just to go through this, you can I use primarily console logs, console errors, console infos, console warnings, console debugs, all these different console errors or console commands to help me debug. That's one way. That's one technique that I use, right? And depending on what effect you want, especially if you want your errors to stand out, you can use different kinds of console commands to do that. Here's what I don't use. Typically, I don't use alerts, window.alert. Why? It's really annoying. It says it in your book that alert is another method of doing it. And you can combine those two things, right? But I know this. If I can't get these, I don't get any errors whatsoever. If I never get here, like I use sometimes a console log saying, I'm here. I entered this method. And if I don't get that, I know that the method was never entered. So therefore, that's part of the error, right? I never use document.write. I'll tell you right now, never, never, never. Because if I forget about it, it'll mess me up. Yes? Alert? No, I don't like that. It's very bad. If you use alerts inside your code, and if you leave it in there with your websites and everything else, it is a modal window that pops up. You should never use modal windows unless it's absolutely necessary. For example, if you want to confirm someone wants to delete something, that might be a good thing to do. Are you sure? That's a good modal window, right? And that's a different thing. That's a prompt, right? You know, to make sure, are you sure? If the person's sure, then we're good, right? Delete, right? Otherwise, don't delete, cancel, right? That's what you would get. That's a good use of the pop-up, but not an alert. Alert, by the way, you know, press this OK to continue. Oh my God, like, you know, it's X. Don't do that kind of thing. It's very bad form, and it doesn't work properly on mobile browsers, right? So please be careful. Please be advised that that's not something you want to use all the time. Whereas this, I can always check, right? Let's pause for a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about other errors. We'll go through the PowerPoint.